Kendra Bosworth, and I'm the Manager of Professional Development and Programs from ACSL. I'll be facilitating this session. I'm going to start by recognising that I'm facilitating this session from Gundungurra country and the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you are all joining from today. We honour the First Nations people and culture and connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. ACSL also acknowledges the lifelong trauma of abuse victims and survivors and their families, the failure of the Catholic Church to protect, believe and respond justly to children and adults at risk, and the consequent breaches of community trust. Please be aware that this session may contain content that you find confronting. If you start to feel distressed, please use your own judgment and ensure you are safe. You can find support resources on the ACSL website. So today I am pleased to introduce our presenter, Fr Hans Zollner. I had the privilege of meeting him and attending a different webinar last week, and I know you're in for a fascinating presentation today. And I'm sure some of you have been to his other webinars, you've read about him online, so welcome. He always says something different and something well worth listening to. But a bit about the Reverend Dr. Father, and I never know which order to put those in, Hans Zollner. He's the founder and director of the Institute of Anthropology at the Pontifical Gregorian University and is in Australia at the invitation of the Australian Catholic Bishop Conference, Catholic Religious Australia, Australian Catholic Safeguarding Ltd and the Australian Catholic University. We are so honoured to have him here today. He's a world-leading expert in safeguarding. While Father Hans will be doing most of the talking for today, we welcome questions, time allowing, after his presentation. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to add them to the chat through the session, and then depending on the time, we'll present them to Father Hans as he finishes his slides. With all that being said, I'd like to welcome Father Hans.
Thank you very much, Kendra, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for the invitation and the introduction. Thank you for all of you who are attending. As Kendra said, the presentation that I'm going to share with you is not completely new to a number of people whose names I have read while you were entering into this space. But I do hope that we can also have at least a short time of interaction, even if it is virtual and online. First and foremost, I would like to express my gratitude to ACSL, to the whole team, and to the CEO, Ursula Stevens, for all what you have done to organize a series of conferences, workshops in Australia, and for bringing together so many people that have attended the different workshops and in different venues around the country. As Ursula said, when we started to plan out this trip here to Down Under, I would sing for my supper. Now, as it has turned out, it has grown into an opera. So I'm very happy that all went well in travel, in the great hospitality in Australia, the many people in different occasions, and where we could meet to discuss all what has come up in terms of safeguarding work, the interest that has been shown, especially also in the educational sector. We have just had a day for personnel, clergy, religious safeguarders in South Australia from the two dioceses here, Adelaide and Port Pirie, and the same is true for an educational office invitation that we have just attended. I'm also glad about the contact that I had with survivors and victims of abuse within the church who have approached me over the last 12 days since I've been on this little island. And I appreciate very much all what many of you do in the area of safeguarding and your different roles, capacities, and responsibilities. This is perhaps already one of the main messages that I would like to deliver. In this country, you have enormous resources and an astounding level of awareness and competences. I commend you for this, and I do hope that you can make use of it for the best of the people in the church and beyond, also beyond the borders of your country, mainly also with your next neighbors in the Pacific, in PNG, and in East Timor. What I'm going to present has been entitled Confronting the Reality of Abuse. And I'm going to share now my presentation. It says it is shared now, so I will run through my presentation and will take probably between 45 and 50 minutes for that, and then we'll have still some time for interaction. So we are talking about something that has been of great concern for the Catholic Church in particular over the last 20 and more years. Of course, in Australia, in Canada, in Ireland, and in other parts of the world, the issue of clergy sexual abuse of minors was in media and it was in public attention before 2002. But what I would call the first wave of international attention given to this topic came about with the Boston Spotlight revelations. And in the wake of that, St. John Paul II called on the bishops and the cardinals, but as we can read also on the wider Catholic community, that this is a time of trial that will bring about purification of the entire community, a purification that is urgently needed. Now, from 2002 onwards, 23 years later, I believe we are still in this stage, especially when we talk about the entire Catholic community. Because despite the fact that, like in Australia or the UK or in Germany, we have now for decades heard about it, talked about it, and learned about it, in many places in this world, the scandals of clergy sexual abuse and other types of abuse have not yet broken, especially there where society at large finds it difficult to confront itself with the very harrowing experience of or reality of people who have been abused in churches, in religions, in institutions. In 2002, the main focus was, as I've said, clergy sexual abuse of a minor of age. Every word in this counts. So the focus was on priests and religious, male predominantly, who had abused sexually a person under the age of 18. Since 2002, and mainly over the last 6 to 8 years, a number of major shifts have taken place because since then we talk in the church and in society not only about abuse of children, but also of women religious, seminarians, and vulnerable persons in general, meaning persons in situations at risk, even if they are above 18 years of age. This is one important shift that has taken place following the Me Too movement, following the revelations about the abuse of the former Cardinal of Washington, McCarrick, against seminarians, adult seminarians, and the attention that Pope Francis had given to the question of abuse against women religious committed by clergy. So these set off a very different type of dynamic and a very much enlarged perspective on who are possible victims of abuse. That wasn't there in the broader attention of church and society before 2017. Then a second important shift was that while it was the clear focus of all the attention before 2019 to sexual abuse, and now the other types of abuse receive also major consideration. Of course, physical, psychological, emotional, and to a great extent in recent years, spiritual abuse. So much so that the Dicastery for the Doctrine of Faith has established a commission a few weeks back that is supposed to come up with some canonical orientations and some practical applications for what is spiritual abuse and how can it be defined and how is it punishable. The third major shift that has taken place is that since 2019, since the new law that was established by Pope Francis with the nice name of Vos estis lux mundi, you are the light of the world, talks not only about clergy sexual abuse or clergy abuse in general, but also abuse committed by non-clergy in church leadership positions, including also women religious and male religious who are not ordained priests. So there is the third component of change that has enlarged also the attention of possible other groups of perpetrators that hadn't been in the picture before 2017 or 2019. So within relatively few years, we have had major changes, at least in terms of what we are aware of. That doesn't mean that everything has fallen in place and that we are now oriented and would have an appropriate way of dealing with all this, but at least we have a better glimpse of what we talk about when we talk about abuse committed against other people in the church. The situation and the reactions in the churches, in the local churches worldwide, continue to be the same over the last years. As far as I'm concerned, I've been to many countries on all continents except Antarctica with this topic. So it has come up now in news everywhere. Nobody can deny that. However, still in many quarters in the church, in many countries, there is an uncomfortableness about even addressing, naming the issue. There is a huge lack of knowledge and a lack of willingness to engage. When people ask me about how I survive in all this, how I can carry on because of the resistance that our work receives, I honestly can point out that there is not active obstruction, but what is really draining and what is really putting a huge question mark around all what we do as a church in safeguarding is a passive resistance, that people look on, wait until the storm passes, an inertia, a leaning back, and a lack of engagement. And if we want to get to a better spot as a church and as a society, we need to realize that we need to come up with a proactive stance that tries to provide much comfort to those who have been harmed, but also the safeguarding, the safe environments that people are looking for. We do well, I believe, as a Catholic Church. If you look at the global situation, I can testify from my own readings, from my own study, from my own visits and many conversations that the Catholic Church is doing a lot in this area. It has moved on over the last, especially, I would say, 15 years in terms of obligations for safeguarding training, in promulgation of guidelines, and in raising awareness. So on that side, I think we are doing pretty well. Surely there should and could be done much more, but all in all, I think the Catholic Church is well positioned, especially if we compare it to other denominations and other religions. What we still lack very much is the owning of the past. So dealing with the past in terms of acknowledging the crimes and the heinous deeds that have been committed against minors and adults in the name of God, in the name of the institution, that is surely something that we find difficult as an institution, and many leaders in this institution still don't understand that this is part and parcel of our mission and of our obligation to own the past in the sense of admitting what has been done in terms of harm to others, and in acknowledging the pain, the anger, and the loss of trust that many people have experienced. What is also astonishing for me is that as a Catholic Church, well positioned through all our contacts, our established connections to other countries, other institutions, and other continents, there is still little transfer of experience and expertise. And this is something that I would also bring up for the Australian Church, that is certainly uniquely positioned in this corner of the globe, to pass on their knowledge, their what they have gone through over the last 40 years or so, and to reach out from your position to local churches and other institutions that have much less resources available. That doesn't mean that there is a one-size-fits-all approach, and as I've witnessed myself when I was in East Timor last July, people around here are quite sensitive also of about the attempts, as they perceive it, to be colonized by the Westerners, and to be confronted with a reality that they don't see as imminent for their own countries and churches. So I would, on one hand, propose to you that you think of how you can reach out to people in other continents, in other countries here around, but that you are also aware that this needs to be done taking into account cultural, legal, and historical factors that don't correspond to the Australian situation. So there is no one size fits all to all this, and it needs to be a learning process that changes also those who think that they are far ahead. Fully, what we are also trying to promote is the reflection of where is theology and spirituality in a very specific meaning of the term in all this. It's for me really troublesome that despite the fact that we have been talking about this in the church for 40 years or more intently since more than 20 years now, there is still a reluctance of mainstream theology to understand the challenges of the abuse crisis on certain concepts, major key expressions of theology and the faith, like redemption, salvation, like church structure, like Catholic Christian anthropology. Who are human beings in today's world? How can we understand that? And what does all what we learn about from the facts of the cases of allegations, cases of abuse? What do we learn about our self-understanding as human beings? The same is true for spirituality. How do we bring into our lived faith in our prayer life? And by this, I don't mean only formal prayer, but also communal liturgies and so forth, the reality of the lives of those so many who have been harmed, who have lost their faith or have questioned it, and those who look for some healing and some source of reconciliation. We find this, I believe, in the church as one of the challenges, because for understandable reasons, there has been a main focus on the legal and the canonical side. And if I dare say so, I find the Australian approach by government and by the church very much leaning towards regulations and norms, which of course is an important part of all what we do in safeguarding, but is only one portion of it. And if we rely too heavily on this type of approach that comes from law or canon law or other obligations and regulations, the danger is that we lose sight of major the major elements and the major challenges that we have, and we then think we have done everything necessary to make the church a safer place, when we have finally found a way to express that in an even better document or in a better explanation of norms, etc. The danger with this is, once you have your procedures and protocols on the table or on the shelf or in your computer, you forget about them, and you forget about the personal experience, especially the one by victims and survivors. So a change in mentality that is much more needed in a broader sense than only change in law needs to include the listening exercise, listening to survivors and victims in their respective experiences and expectations. In all my contacts with survivors and victims, I have learned one thing, and that is that there is not one person who has had the same experience of abuse, has not gone through the same consequences of abuse, and has the same expectations as other victims and survivors. So listening to victims and survivors can be challenging, because you always need to readjust your own previous experiences in listening, and you always need to get rid of your preconceptions and prejudices about this, because it's a continuously evolving journey for which you have to invest a lot of energy, a lot of time, and sometimes also a lot of intellectual capacity to find out what could be the best for this person in your response. What I would also think is important that we realize, this is not going to go away. It is facing reality when we acknowledge that abuse will never be completely eradicated from the surface of the earth. Human beings have been abusive with each other since ever, and will continue to be so. And I would just warn to think of magical solutions to evil in our world, in our lives. Just look to the war zones at this point in history that seem to proliferate all over the globe, and you will realize that, with all our capacity to live in peace and to build up a society together, unfortunately, over and over again, the opposite is happening. People destroy each other's lives and don't live don't create safe space for others. So we will, as a church and as a humanity, we will need to continue with this journey for many more years and decades. Another misconception is that many people have, and the feeling that I can't do anything. I'm a little faithful in the pews. I'm a little parish priest. I'm a little religious sister. I am a little bishop, and so forth. I'm a little principal in the school. What can I do? Uh, each one can do something. Each one can contribute something to a better and a safer church and world. Nobody needs to do everything. Nobody needs to redeem, to save his or her institution, be it a diocese, a parish, a school, whatever institution, social, charitable center, spiritual retreat house, or whatever you have. Nobody needs to redeem that because we all have been redeemed and saved. This is at least our belief when we say Jesus has saved us. That has happened by his hands. What all of us can do is to take our share in the responsibility that is allocated with us, that is within our professional roles and responsibilities, with our personal capacities to do what is within our reach so that people are safe and feel safe. That is our contribution. Nothing more, nothing less. And if all the 100 plus persons who are attending this webinar do what is within their reach, the church and this world will become a safer place. What is also needed is, I believe, for a change of mentality, that we endeavor to confront ourselves with the complexity of our lives and our situation. Simplistic answers like do away with celibacy or do away with gay priests and you will be free from abuse won't work. We have seen that. The same is true when we think that media are enemy and are attacking the church, or that there are so many false allegations. Yes, there are to all four aspects mentioned here. We could go into depth, and there are some elements of truth in all of this. But all in all, if you rely on these as the answer to a very complex reality and situation, you are misled. Finally, change in mentality comes about only once we realize that it is an integral part of our mission in education, social, pastoral, spiritual ministry. An integral part. My favorite comparison for this is, do you want to buy a safeguarding app that you switch on and switch off once it's needed and then you forget about safeguarding? Or do you want to buy a device in which safeguarding is inbuilt, safeguarding by design? And as long as we in the church and in society at large rely mainly on the specialized offices and services, we won't get far. Okay, we need trained and expert personnel, sure, but all of us have some say in this, and that is also what I would refer to as a common commitment. This needs to be a common mission, otherwise we will run short of energy, money, and resources. So either we are in this together or we don't move forward. Moving forward means, from my point of view, creating an atmosphere, a common understanding of safeguarding as a positive outlook. It's creating safe space, following safe processes, and living out safe relationships. This is what I would call the major ingredients for safeguarding. I know that even in English, this term is perhaps not clear or not appreciated by all. I haven't found another one that would encompass all this and would at the same time indicate that we need to go beyond sheer prevention, sole protection, and restriction on safety concepts. If we concentrate on these ingredients only, we get stuck in a more defensive mode or in a more negative attitude. I believe to bring people on board, to convince them and to motivate them, it's important that we talk about safeguarding as something proactive and positive. Before we talk about avoiding things, we need to talk about creating the space in the environment in which people can flourish. This is our mission, and this is also one of the things that could and should be the hallmark of any Catholic institution, from parishes to schools to whatever center you have. Why that's difficult to achieve? Because we live in a complexity of the systems, starting from the family system, health, education, economic systems, media, political, legal system, and norms and values. So we are, as human beings, not on an island, and we are not an island. As Thomas Merton has said, we are always connected with others, willingly or unwillingly, and we are in a necessary interconnectedness with all these very complex, sometimes very big, and not really comprehensible systems. This is a visualization which is made a little bit more simple in this slide. Within any type of system, from family to parish to diocese to the Catholic Church, we can distinguish four core components: people, structures, processes, and content. So in the church, you have the people of God, you have the structure, the hierarchical structure, we have processes, formation processes, communication, and we have the content, of course, the gospel. So what is important to understand that within any such system, you have a mentality that is created over time by the interaction of these four components, and the mentality of such a system is very often deeply eradicated, deeply entrenched, and at the same time, of course, because of this long-standing presence, it shapes the minds, it shapes the hearts of the people around, and it is difficult to change. So the attitudes created by the interaction of these four elements and the interconnectedness forms a mentality that produces attitudes. And if we come to the church, for example, the question about why people are deferent to clergy in a particular way, that has had to do with the mentality that clergy are superior human beings, that they need to be obeyed at any cost, and you can't question them. They are untouchables, and surely leading also to the many cases of abuse. You look away, you don't criticize, you don't punish them. And this type of mentality and attitudes has been present for many decades, centuries, has been built up and won't disappear easily, especially if you look at the Catholic Church as a global entity. And this is, for example, the attitude towards authority and power is different in Australia today as it is in Vanuatu or in PNG. So we need to reckon also when it comes to Catholic communities in this very country, where you have an ever more diverse presence in the parishes, schools, and so forth, in the religious communities, even among the bishops who are more and more internationally formed here in this very country, you need to realize that there are, at the very same point of time, there are different types of groups that are formed and impacted by mentality and attitudes, which makes it impossible to press the button and to have an immediate and persistent change. All this, what pertains to change of mentality, needs a long breath and a sustainable model for change. Otherwise, we keep ourselves to the inner circles with concentrating on risk assessment, on safety and prevention measures, on intervention. All this, of course, is necessary. But if it doesn't if we doesn't realize that this is part and parcel of a bigger picture in which transformative care and participation and has to cope with many different aspects and needs to lead to a change of our attitudes in a practical sense, but also and mainly needs to come to a stage of change of mentality where we own all our responsibility towards the more vulnerable among us. It will remain at a very closed circle and a closed shop mentality. That's why, especially in a cultural context and in a legal framework like in Australia, a legal framework given by the state governments, by the federal government, and also in the church legislation around this and the practice, we need to come from the focus on guidelines and policies, so the general rules and the contents of guidelines adapted to specific institutions that are necessary. I don't want to take away anything from the importance of this, but if the main focus follows only in the question of how could it be said better in guidelines and policies, potentially we lose sight of the bigger picture, which would help us to implement it in our lived policies, in the customary, habitual, and expected procedure. Only then, when it comes to practice, we will find ourselves acting out of different types of attitudes and a changed mentality. So what I'm really advocating is that we study well, we teach well, we write our documents to the best of our capacities, but that we equally invest into an exercise of creativity, how this can be fleshed out in our lived practice. Otherwise, we become complacent or only superficially compliant and forget about the human reality that needs to be fleshed out. What could be structural consequences that help us in this regard? Calling on professional expertise without over spiritualizing, transfer of supervision to others, and pastoral priorities for those most in need, monitoring and supervision of areas and activities according to clearly communicated norms, something like open and structured conflict management, which we are not good in the Catholic Church, and in clear, respectful, candid discussions, clear definition of responsibilities and accountability. Here we are even worse. As we have seen in many reports into the Catholic Church's handling of cases and the cover-up connected to this, one major pitfall of the Catholic Church's handling of all this was not that there had been too much of authority or too much of power exercise, but the reluctance to take responsibility and the complete failure and lack of accountability. As many of you know, in 2019, when we were organizing the Child Protection Summit that Pope Francis had called for, when we tried to translate the word accountability into the languages that most Catholics in this world speak, that is Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Italian, we found that the word accountability doesn't exist as a noun in any of the Romanic languages, which is very telling. If you don't have a word, what does it mean? It means that there is no reflection, no discussion, and very little enactment of this reality. That may come as a big surprise to many of you, also from the English-speaking or the German-speaking countries, but the great majority of Catholics don't have a word for accountability. What is called for is investigation and studies, and I'm really grateful and I really commend the Australian Society and universities, also ACU, for the involvement in research and studies that is, from my point of view, unmatched with any other country's contribution, and the educational and training efforts. I mean, how many other denominations, how many other institutions bring together the amount of people for example, only in this webinar, and also what has been done over the last 14 days or so. I mean, who is really investing in this so much in terms of energy, in terms of money, and in terms of time? I would like to come to some spiritual lessons because I think it is important that we realize that this is not only about some external measures, but it needs to be backed up by our interior commitment. And that is helped by confronting ourselves with our own resistances and uncomfortableness around sexuality, faith, and church leadership. Of course, we could go into each one of this in depth and for many more hours. But let me just mention also that I believe it's necessary that we are sincere once we run into something that I would call safeguarding fatigue, when people who invest a lot of energy and their lives and their heart, give their heart to this, find out that with all the hours and all the energy put into trainings and accompaniment and so forth, all this seems to be washed away when there comes up one allegation of abuse that has been mishandled even 50 years ago. It's difficult to bear the impact that many of us who have invested their lives in this feel when they are accused of not being consistent enough, of not of working within dysfunctional environments and not doing the right thing, despite all our efforts. This is a sense that many of us get, that it's never enough. So we need to be also clear that this is one of the challenges, to deal with one's own safeguarding fatigue and to look out for help and support to build up the safe self-care systems that are necessary to keep us going. The question of where is the space for survivors in our midst also, and of course, needs to be answered by survivors themselves. And as I have already mentioned, the answer will vary greatly. Some survivors don't want to be recognized as such, don't want to go public, don't want to go to court, don't want to receive compensation. For others, it's quite the opposite. They want redress, they want to be known, they want to go public. Some of them have lost their faith. Some of them say that the church is the place where they have been harmed, but they have been healed. But this is very, very individual, and no one, surely not somebody who has not been abused, can judge that. And I find it also very important that we realize how different victims perceive that and how they also interact with each other, which can be a very challenging reality. So it's not an easy question to answer for me individually, but also for our communities. Where is the space for survivors in what this person or this group of people expects? So another question I would like to bring to your attention is what is at the center of our attention: our institutions, our reputation, our image, or the victim, the vulnerable, the other, or the other God? If we want to answer that question with the Gospel's words, it is very clear. Give up yourself, give up the image about yourself, give up the reputation and the importance and the prestige of your institution, and look out for those who have been harmed. But this is, of course, very difficult for church institutions and for other institutions. But for the church in itself, if you look at her, it means also to find a different relationship to the world, to society at large, to the public. And this is true especially in the Catholic pockets, in Catholic countries, where in many places the church has had to learn it the hard way, that all the importance, all the power that was connected to it has gone. All the reputation, all the admiration, all the trust is gone. And as I say, it's not more true than in formerly Catholic countries like Ireland or Malta or in other places, or in the Catholic pockets, also in countries like Australia, which means also that we need to be much more realistic and sober about the possibilities of intervening in the public sphere. We need to be much more humble and much more learned in terms of, we need to argue much more convincingly if we want to enter into the dialogue about major issues that we discuss in the societies today, about the dignity of people, and about politics concerning social care and whatever you have. Mainly also the question of how do we deal with migrants and refugees. So if we want to have a say in all this, we need to accept that our voice is one among others, and we need to do better homework in explaining and motivating our choices. If people are suffering and marginalized, abused, who should stand up for them? Who should be with the little ones and those wounded in their pain and call for justice and healing? And I would call on all our institutions and all our leaders, and by this I don't mean only clergy or religious, I mean all people who have a say in the church. And in this church are many lay people in leadership positions now. What do we do so that our space, our environment is really taking on this challenge, which would help us to go against the dissociation of victims and the splitting off of their trauma, and engaging in a very important, surely challenging process of working through together with those who have been harmed through their pain and the consequences they have had to suffer. Some questions that I will just mention as points of reflection, which I leave to you for, surely not for this moment now, but for your personal prayer time and reflection. What am I called to do today? With whom can I talk about what moves me about this topic? What can we do together? And what are the biggest obstacles for this? Let me just add that from my point of view, one of the most urgent messages that we can send to, to survivors, to their families, but also to society at large, is that we come up with ideas about how we can work together in this and show unity and communion. How do I talk to God about what moves me in this? And for those for whom this is a way to go forward, I would suggest that you come to what St. Ignatius in the Spiritual Exercises number 53 describes as the colloquium, which brings me back to the first slide when I was referring to the purification, because this is taken from the first week of the Spiritual Exercises of St. Ignatius, where he talks precisely about purification, and where he puts the person in the so-called colloquium exercise in front of Christ, who is on the cross, and invites him to hold a conversation with Christ, asking him what Christ has done for me, for what he's doing for me, and what he will be doing for me, and asking myself what I have done for him, what I'm doing for him, and what I will do for him, and asking, as Ignatius says, as one friend speaks to another. So for those of you who, for whom this is some helpful suggestion, please take your time in another moment to go back to these questions and reflect and pray over them. I come to the conclusion of my presentation, but I would like to speak a little bit about the spiritual component that was highlighted by also Pope Benedict, who wrote in his letter of 19th of March 2010 the following sentences: I wish to exhort all of you as God's people to reflect on the wounds inflicted on Christ's body, the sometimes painful remedies needed to bind and heal them, and the need for unity, charity, and mutual support in the long-term process of restoration and ecclesial renewal. Again, you have in this one sentence, you have basically all what we have been discussing so far. All of us as God's people, the wounds inflicted on Christ's body, that is the wounds that the victims of abuse have suffered from, the painful remedies needed to bind and heal, our commitment in the need for unity, communion, charity, and mutual support of each other. I mean, also those who are operating in this field in a long-term process of restoration. So, in other words, the same what John Paul II had said, now in a more detailed explanation. As a summary of the words that in which I've tried to express my experience and my suggestions to you, the triangle of safeguarding, the key problem, the credibility and the power of persuasion that we need to really get us going and keep us going, because within a Christian environment, we want to follow into the footprints of Jesus. This is our vocation, and this needs a constant evolution and change in the form of recognition of the past and the formation of for a present and future betterment. And our responsibility in the three keywords that have been used by the during the Child Protection Summit in 2019: transparency, compliance, and accountability. This is our responsibility as leaders in the church, but also to some extent of each one who identifies with this institution, with this and the smaller institutions within the Catholic Church. And I want to conclude the presentation with the words from Pope Francis in his letter to the priests on 4th of August 2019, following the Child Protection Summit, and addressing surely not only priests, but also the wider Catholic community. If in the past omission may itself have been a kind of response, today we desire conversion, transparency, sincerity, and solidarity with victims to become our concrete way of moving forward. This in turn will help make us all the more attentive to every form of human suffering. And the expression of all the three pontiffs' words can be seen, is visualized in this icon that I asked a Ukrainian artist to write. And this icon can be found at the entrance of our office space at the Institute of Anthropology in Rome. The icon shows on the left the paralyzed, on the right the leper and the hemorrhaging woman, and in the middle, next to Jesus, the woman with the children, showing, for me, visualizing what Jesus' mission is and what the mission of all those who want to follow in his footsteps is: reaching out to those who have been wounded and protecting those who need a particular attention and safeguarding. Thank you for your attention. I think we have just landed on this, as we said, and now we can open the floor for your interventions. Over to you, Kendra.
Thank you, Father Hans. I have to say, yes, you are definitely singing an opera in this entire process. I'm impressed that you haven't lost your voice, but I'm also really impressed that every presentation I've seen you provide has been different. And I've taken something away from it each time. So thank you so much for presenting again. The food for thought that I came away with from that was about taking our own share of responsibility to do what is within our reach. And I think that's a very, very important thing that we need to take away. Thank you. But what will do is, if anyone has any questions, please put them into the chat and we will be going through them. If you don't want your name identified, then please send them to me privately and we won't identify you. But if you do put it up publicly, we will call on you to explore what your question is. The first thing that came through, Father Hans, was a statement from Michelle from New Zealand. She says safeguarding interconnected components such as policies, procedures, training, complaints procedures are important. However, without addressing institutional cultures, beliefs, theological guidance or lack thereof, and behaviours, we often do not see safeguarding statements demonstrated in practice. So she's confirming what you have been saying through your speak. Thank you, Michelle. Lorraine has asked, can you say something about the work of the Irish Jesuits as published yesterday? Or are you not across that yet? I wouldn't blame you for not being across it because we've been keeping you busy at all hours.
No, in fact, I read the news. I know that the Irish Jesuit province has taken the stance to publish the full names of deceased, credibly accused perpetrators. I think this is a particular position they have taken. I think this is a courageous step in terms of if there have been if there have been documentation, if there have been testimonies and witnesses that include the substantiation of the allegations, that is a way forward to own one's own past. Honestly, I don't know much more about that. I have seen the list of names, I've seen the news about it, and I know that the Irish religious, other orders and congregations have been discussing this as the pros and cons of this, but the Jesuits have taken that step, and I think that's an important one. Yeah.
Thank you. Hayley has a question about orders that are international and have a local presence in Australia. She says in Australia there is a majority of organisations that embrace safeguarding for children and vulnerable adults, but some organisations may have a leader who has responsibilities in Australia and may include under the same chapter locations in example Samoa, Papua New Guinea. Do they continue those safeguarding practices in other locations that you know
Most
of?
them. I imagine that, and so first, the law of the countries, the law of the state applies to where people live, and you won't be able to impose Australian regulations to other countries. That's not legal, and that's not the way forward. So every country will reject such notions. And as I said before, I would think if you try to do so, you will create more resistance. Because this is what I learned when I was in East Timor in July, and we were having safeguarding seminar there, that some people were very angry about the attempt to talk the same talk and to use the same language and to somehow come up with ideas and concepts and norms that simply don't fit in other contexts. That is not to say that there are not common standards, but the implementation has to come from the ground. So secondly, if you take away from populations in other parts of the world, clergy and non-clergy, church and not clergy, the necessity to really engage themselves in the inculturation process. You first are patronizing. Secondly, you are imposing a colonial system. And thirdly, you don't acknowledge that, or better, you take away the burden for them to educate themselves, to take their responsibility. So there is surely a tension between what Australia can bring in terms of resources and knowledge. On the other, there is also, on the other side, there is the necessity to respect also other ways of expressing oneself and other ways of finding symbols and images and narrations. I mean, I would reckon pretty much the same would be true for your own Aboriginal population here, that has a different sense of community, a different approach to spirituality. How do you, as a mainly majority Anglo society and church, acknowledge beyond the acknowledgement of the territory and country and so forth, what you do in every such occasion, how do you really acknowledge also a different way of relating to each other and bring in something that First Nations or other cultures can teach us, the Westerners, who have become very much centered on the individual, me, myself, and I, and have left out the broader community. So all cultures have pros and cons, and I think it's necessary that we come also to a humble a realization that each one can still learn a lot from the others.
Absolutely. Thank you, Father Hans. We have an anonymous question. This person says they're very survivor focused and struggle with the victim blaming culture that still exists. However, wondered whether you could comment about the impact on Catholics who weren't abused or weren't relatives of survivors. This person thinks some of the negative attitudes stem from grief and loss of reputation, status, memberships, and loss of relationships. It's been a trauma on different levels to all Catholics. Some people even feel guilt that they weren't assaulted. And this person feels that all this can lead to shutting down or anger around the topic. So the question was, can you comment about the impact on Catholics who weren't abused or weren't relatives of survivors?
Just to understand, who were not abused.
Who were not abused.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you have all kinds of impact and consequences on non-victims. That ranges from, yes, blaming victims for attacking the church, for damaging the image, and all this, to highly identifying with, together with victims, for and pushing for a more sincere and more forthcoming church response, and everything in between. Yes, I do believe that all what has been said and known when it comes to abuse in the church, with all the different categories that we have seen before, has had an enormous influence on how Catholics see themselves, and how they see the church. In many places, people have left in scores, or like in my country, in Germany, the young people see the credibility and the trustworthiness of the church at 6%, while police and medical doctors are trusted with 90% of trust. So you see an enormous loss of credibility. And of course, many people are super angry, and they walk away. They don't support financially or in other areas anymore. And this is but one element what we see. I truly believe there is a huge underpinning to that, in terms of not only the lack of trust in the institutional church, but also in the trust of the message of the church. So if you are not trustworthy as leaders and as representatives of the church, how can we believe or trust in the message that you proclaim? And that is something that many church people identified and non-victims don't understand. I mean, bishops, priests, religious, and laity don't really understand that this is probably the most devastating effect that abuse has had for non-victims. The lack of belief, the lack of faith in the gospel, basically, because humanly speaking, it's always understandable that you believe the person who proclaims certain messages, only insofar as they apply to themselves what they are talking about. And that is one of the biggest unrecognized effects of abuse, I believe, and mainly also of cover-up of abuse.
And thank you, Father Hans. Sandra has commented on that families of abusers may also share some of the shame, which is very, very important point. But to balance, or not even balance. But in terms of talking about victim survivors, Shirley has said you've talked about the need to support victim survivors. But could you share a little about what you've learnt from listening to victim survivors over the time you've been involved in this work?
So that depends on what the respective person or association or group of victims propose, because this surely is the starting point. What this person, victim, who has been affected by abuse, or survivor, however they want to be called, because also this is different, where they are and what they ask for. This is the starting point. There is no magical solution to what we can what could be brought to everybody. So, and then in a common exercise that needs to be built on trust as much as possible, but trust is precisely what is very often lacking in victims and survivors, for very understandable reasons. You just walk along and you have maybe 2 steps forward and 1 backward, and you try to negotiate where we are. For me, my main experience in all this is the journey itself of trying to find common ground is building the common ground. And the most impressive example for me last year was when we came together with ending clergy abuse. This is an umbrella organization of victims associations from different countries and continents, who had reached out to me in October 2023 at the first synod session, plenary session in Rome. And we met together in our office rooms, and about 10 of ECA, ending clergy abuse, and myself, and we were discussing what is the concept of zero tolerance, proclaimed and enacted. Okay, I gave feedback on that paper that they handed over to me, and from that we came together to the conclusion that it would be good to have a meeting, which took place in June last year, where about 8 to 10 ECA members plus Anne Barrett Doyle from Bishop Accountability came to Rome, and we had some people from our institute and some law experts and representatives of different embassies, including the then ambassador of Australia to the Holy See, Chiara Porro, brackets, who I met in Canberra together with Ursula the other day, were present and were discussing this concept of zero tolerance in different jurisdictions around the globe. And we had 3 days for that meeting, and it was very warm, not as warm as in Adelaide yesterday with 43, but it was already taxing. And but what was more important, we had our tensions during the 3 days. We were of different opinions. We tried to explain our positions to each other, and I believe that exercise of working, eating together, staying together in the same space, 3 days was, of course, the most important result even if we had at the end a press statement, and we have had since then another meeting in Rome with the presidency, and we will have some other seminar in fall this year. Sorry, in the European fall. So we are working along, but the main thing was that we stuck together. We didn't let go, even if we disagreed strongly with each other. We did not let go, and we kept that both sides, because we were well intentioned, both sides, and we came to, from my point of view, to see a growth of that foundation of trust that makes it possible to move forward together. And this showed me that it is possible. There needs to be an investment of trust from both sides. What helped, for example, was that we had introduced Chatham House rules, which were accepted, and so that people felt free enough to really talk their minds. But as I say, it was for me one impressive moment, really grateful and really privileged to have had this experience, and the result is, for me, is that I'm deeply moved all the time when I think about that.
Thank you. We are getting towards the end of time, so I've got a couple. There's lots more questions in the chat, but I'm going to start with the ones that came in first. There was a direct question that's to me that says, what is your view on the most helpful approach to identify vulnerable adults within our ministries, given the reality that all adults may be vulnerable at different times in their lives?
Identify adult persons at risk, or those who have been abused?
It said vulnerable adults, so those at risk is my interpretation of it.
Yeah, who have already been abused, or who are at risk? Because if it is about the risk factors, we know that we know by now what are the conditions that provide the best what we have at hands, so that neither in one-on-one encounters, nor in structural settings, nor in any type of activity, from liturgy through retreats to social gatherings to etc., safety is provided. We have all that at hand, which again doesn't mean that abuse couldn't possibly take place. With all what we invest in this, it's not to say that abuse is going to go away. If it is this the focus, then I would say try to spell it out, and try also to see whether and what would be the specific conditions in a particular context and in a particular culture that help to avoid the risk of abuse, but see also to it that it's brought about as a positive message. We work together for a safer space. If it comes to identifying victims who have suffered abuse as adults, I mean, there are signs and symptoms like difficulties to trust, emotional ups and downs, psychosomatic issues. So there are a number of indicators that, but of course, if the question is about how to identify victims themselves, there is always the need that they disclose that. Otherwise, it will always be conjecture, and I may be completely wrong on one or the other side. What is important is that those who have been wounded find an opportunity speak out about it, as it has happened over the last 2 weeks since I've been in Australia. I mean, giving or offering an opportunity like we have had together in the seminars and the workshops over the last 12 days or so. Some victims approached me during those meetings. So when there is space, when there is a possibility, people who are willing to share that are welcome to do so. And that's the way I think I would reply to this question.
And thank you, Father Hans. I'm going to put in a tiny bit of marketing there. ACSL runs a couple of courses online about identifying adults at risk. So for that person, come and join one of our courses. Oh, sorry, Father Hans, I probably shouldn't be doing advertising at the same time. But I think given the time, we have one last question, even though there are loads more in the chat. And this one is focusing. It says, in the safeguarding space, we rightly focus on and resource the support for survivors and victims. But what responsibility do we have to the perpetrators, particularly those who manifest genuine remorse and sorrow for their actions?
Can you repeat that? Because I seem to have problems with connectivity. I didn't get the second part of the
No,
question.
absolutely. So in the safeguarding space, we rightly focus on and resource the support for survivors and victims. But what responsibility do we have to perpetrators, particularly those who manifest genuine remorse and sorrow for their actions?
We have a moral responsibility to look after, to provide care also for perpetrators with remorse or without remorse signs from their side, because this is a human and a Christian obligation, as difficult as it may be and sound. But I mean, we believe that human beings have a right to live, and we have also a right and a necessity to look after those, even if they have, we know that they have harmed others, and even if they don't admit to that. It is, of course, very, very demanding emotionally to own this responsibility. And that's also a reason why I say that the church so often has failed victims and survivors of abuse, but it has also failed those accused and those convicted. There is no excuse for a one strike out policy, in the sense that many bishops in the US and elsewhere are so afraid about compensation and redress schemes that on the slightest allegation, they try to dismiss not only priests but also other people in the church because they fear the insurance companies and their lawyers and so forth and so forth. So another aspect of the lack of attendance is that we don't have more than maybe 10 professionally equipped treatment centers in the whole of the church, in all around the globe. I repeat, professionally equipped. And we don't have many strategies for safety plans and for follow-up. In most places, they are kicked out. Either they are dumped somewhere in some apartment, or they are kicked out, dismissed from ministry, or not only suspended, but dismissed from priesthood, without recognizing that this living alone and living without any type of supervision is probably one of the most dangerous aspects that bring people to re-offend. even after therapy and after even imprisonment. As we know, many of those, especially those who don't admit, tend to reoffend. And unfortunately, this is very difficult to explain, that care for perpetrators is a safeguarding measure, because it sounds as if, again, the church puts perpetrators first and doesn't care for victims. I mean, we need to balance that, but of course, uh, all what we do in terms of safeguarding um, needs also to include the care of those who have perpetrated those crimes. As difficult as it is to digest such a notion.
And thank you, Father Hans. As I keep saying, I'm very aware of the time. It has hit the end of our time, and unfortunately, we can't answer all the questions. So apologies to anyone who has a question that they want to ask. We do realise that this whole presentation has touched on some very confronting topics. So if anyone does need any support in any way, please reach out to ACSL. Our support lines are on our website, and we can help you, and we can direct any of your questions, we can direct them through to appropriate people. But I want to say thank you, Father Hans. It's been a really, really informative presentation. It has been fascinating. I have learnt a lot, and I am going to continue thinking about the app versus the device metaphor that you used. And I don't even know that metaphor is the right word. I need to learn a little bit more English. But I keep thinking about, do we want safeguarding to be an app or a device? Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
If I can put a little ad, since you have taken
Go
the
ahead.
liberty to do so.
Mm-hmm.
So I would also alert you to the possibility for formation programs that our institute offers. A certificate course in English, a master's course in safeguarding of 2 years, full second cycle degree, and doctorates in anthropology, as well as our blended e-learning program in safeguarding, which is meant only for institutions that sign up for it and their participants, not for individuals. But this is what we do in Rome and elsewhere. And if you're interested, go and look at our website. The full programs are downloadable on the website. So, and with this, I also want to say this publicly. I dearly, sincerely appreciate the effort of ACSL, the ACBC, the CRA, and ACU to have me here to offer also the support, the team that is here from ACSL, and Ursula Stevens as the CEO, and all those who have been involved. David Trenner, who is sitting with me here in this moment, and all those who have invested so that the workshops were possible. I do hope and I pray that something good will come out of it, and I ask you for your prayers for our ministry, for myself, and I promise that we keep on going together as much as we can. Thank you.